No badge, no entry, the supervisor snapped at the filthy boy lingering near the factory gate. People kept their distance, pretending not to notice. Only one young woman slipped him a sandwich, quietly and without fanfare. That same afternoon, the supervisor summoned her to his office for breaking company security rules. But later that night, there was an unexpected knock at his door, 3 Marines standing tall in the rain. Who had he treated like nothing, not realizing he'd just disrespected someone who meant everything to a unit that lived by honor? Welcome to Uncovered Tales. Let's take a closer look at what really happened. Sarah Collins clutched her thin jacket tighter as a sharp November wind cut through the break area behind Eagle Line Steel Manufacturing. At 27, she wasn't the youngest worker on site, nor the oldest, but she was easily the most reserved. After losing her mother at a young age, Sarah had stepped into a quiet rhythm of responsibility. She lived in a modest house 10 blocks from the factory with her aging dad and her teenage sister. Every morning, she rose at 5 a.m. to pack lunches, one for herself, and usually one for her father too, who spent his days working at the neighborhood hardware store. Most co-workers knew her as the woman with carefully packed, homemade sandwiches, the one who kept out of drama, but always offered a smile or kind word. She'd been part of the assembly team for nearly 5 years, never missing a shift, never causing a problem. It made her almost invisible to most supervisors, except one, Harlan. He was a rigid man in his 50s with a permanent scowl and a low tolerance for anything that didn't match his version of normal. Lunch is 15 minutes today, people, Harlan barked as the team trickled into the outdoor break area. We've got that rush order to finish. Workers gathered around cold metal tables under a rusting overhang, their breath visible in the damp air. A soft drizzle had begun, adding a chill that made hands and noses sting. Sarah unwrapped her sandwich, turkey and cheese, with a swipe of homemade mayo, and unscrewed the lid from her thermos of hot soup. That's when she saw him. Just beyond the chain-link fence that separated the break yard from an empty lot, a small boy, maybe 10 years old, stood still. His jacket was soaked through, his shoes caked in drying mud. What drew Sarah in were his eyes, hollow, red-rimmed, and fixed not on the people, but on the food they held. He said nothing. Didn't wave or speak. Just stood there, arms folded around his stomach, shivering in the drizzle. Hey! No loitering. Harlan's voice cut through the murmur of lunchtime talk. This is private property. The boy flinched but didn't move. Harlan stomped toward the fence, waving a clipboard like it was a weapon. No begging here. Move it along, or I'm calling the cops. No one said a word. Heads went down. No one wanted a target on their back, everyone knew Harlan kept grudges like trophies. Sarah felt her chest tighten. The boy's shoulders sagged as though his last thread of hope had snapped. Without saying anything, she quietly broke her sandwich in half, wrapped one piece in a napkin, and glanced over to see if Harlan was distracted. Seeing her chance, she walked to the fence and placed the wrapped sandwich gently on a cardboard box nearby. What are you doing? Monica, a coworker, whispered with wide eyes. You know Harlan doesn't mess around with stuff like this. You're gonna get in trouble. Sarah gave a slight shrug. He's cold and starving. Giving him a bite to eat isn't a crime. Well, good luck, Monica muttered, turning away. The boy still hadn't moved. But now his gaze was locked on Sarah, still cautious, but touched by a flicker of hope. She offered him a soft, reassuring nod and turned back toward her table. She had barely taken 3 steps when Harlan's voice exploded from behind her. Collins! What the hell do you think you're doing? Sarah froze in place. Harlan stormed past her, stomped up to the fence, and snatched the sandwich like it was something toxic. We have rules, he growled. You want to feed strays, do it on your own damn time. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled the sandwich into a puddle. The break area fell completely still. No one said a word. No one dared. That's company property, Harlan spat, his face reddening. And now you've encouraged a trespasser. Sarah said nothing. Calmly, she walked over, picked up the soggy sandwich, brushed it off, and wrapped it tighter. She set it right back on the same cardboard box. Did you hear me, Collins? Harlan barked. She met his gaze, steady and calm. I heard you, sir, she said quietly. Then she returned to her seat. The boy didn't take a single step, but his eyes stayed locked on her the entire time. That image would stay with Sarah for years to come. The rest of her shift dragged by under a heavy silence. No one spoke to her. Most avoided even glancing in her direction. An act of kindness had marked her. Not everyone was brave enough to be associated with it. At 3:45 p.m., just 15 minutes before the end of her shift, the factory's intercom buzzed to life. Sarah Collins to the supervisor's office. A few co-workers glanced her way, some with faint looks of sympathy. She wiped her hands on a shop rag, took a quiet breath, and headed toward the front of the building. Harlan's office sat perched at the far end of the floor, a glass enclosure that gave him a full view of the workspace, like a guard in a watchtower. Sarah knocked twice on the doorframe. Come in and close the door, he said, eyes still fixed on his computer screen. She stepped inside and stood quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. Eventually, Harlan looked up. His face carried that familiar blend of irritation and smug control. I've filed a report on today's incident, he said, sliding a form across his desk. This is your official written warning. You violated security procedures by interacting with an unauthorized individual near a restricted zone, and you showed insubordination by ignoring a direct order. Sarah glanced down at the paper but didn't reach for it. Sign at the bottom, Harlan instructed flatly. Next time it's suspension. Third strike, and you're out. Without saying a word, Sarah picked up the pen and signed. Harlan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms like he was settling in to deliver a lecture. You know, Collins, I'll never get people like you. We have protocols for a reason. That kid could have been scoping the place out. He could have been bait for something bigger. He looked like he just needed a meal, Sarah said quietly, her voice steady but tired. Harlan's jaw tensed. Next time, take your soup and go save the world after hours, he snapped. We need dependable staff here, not bleeding hearts with hero complexes. Sarah gave him a small nod, set the pen back down, and walked out without another word. As she changed into her street clothes and clocked out, a heavy mix of sadness and disbelief settled on her. She hadn't expected applause for sharing her lunch, but to be formally reprimanded for basic compassion. That stung in a way she couldn't quite explain. By the time she stepped outside, the drizzle had turned into a cold, steady rain. The boy was long gone, but as she walked home, Sarah found herself scanning alleyways and doorways, hoping maybe, somehow, he'd found shelter. Back at home, she drifted through her evening routine like a ghost, helping her father take his medication, whipping up a simple dinner, and sitting down with her 16-year-old sister, Abby, to go over a tricky math assignment. She didn't bring up what had happened at work. Her father had enough on his plate, and she didn't want to add more weight to his already fragile health. As they cleared the dishes, he gave her a knowing glance. You seem far away tonight, Sarah. She forced a small smile. Just a long day, that's all. Nothing worth talking about. She had just finished drying the last plate when a sudden knock echoed through the house. Sarah glanced at the clock. 7:30 p.m. Not a time when visitors usually came, especially not on a rainy Tuesday night. I'll get it, she said, drying her hands on a towel. Opening the front door, she froze. Standing on the porch were three men in full Marine Corps dress uniforms. They stood at perfect attention, unmoved by the rain soaking through their caps and jackets. The man in front, a staff sergeant with a deeply lined face and sharp, commanding eyes, raised a precise salute. Miss Sarah Collins, he asked. She nodded slowly, caught completely off guard. "Staff Sergeant Kevin Brooks, United States Marine Corps," he said formally. "These are Corporals Nash and Vega. We've come to extend our thanks, on behalf of our commanding officer, and on behalf of a family within our unit." Sarah blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong person. I don't know anyone in the Marines." "No, ma'am," Brooks replied gently. "There's no mistake. Would you mind if we came in? It won't take long." Still unsure of what was going on, Sarah stepped aside and motioned them in. Her father appeared in the hallway, brows raised in surprise. "Dad, these men are from the Marine Corps," she said slowly. "They say they're here to thank me, but I don't understand why." The Marines stood respectfully in the entryway, waiting patiently. Then Sergeant Brooks continued. "Miss Collins, the young boy you gave food to earlier today, his name is Noah Blake. He's the nephew of Colonel Kevin Blake, a decorated Marine who's served honorably for over 25 years. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "You mean, the boy at the fence?" "Yes, ma'am," Corporal Nash added gently. "His mother, Colonel Blake's sister, passed away last week after a long illness. The family was in the process of transferring guardianship so Noah could move in with the colonel at Camp Lejeune. But with all the paperwork delays, he ended up staying with a neighbor. He ran away yesterday morning." Sarah's voice was soft, but her worry came through loud and clear. "Is he okay now? He looked so cold. And so hungry." "He's safe," Corporal Vega said with a quiet nod. "After you gave him that sandwich, Noah headed straight to the Marine recruiting office downtown. He remembered his uncle mentioning it once. The staff there recognized the Blake name right away and contacted us." Sergeant Brooks reached into his coat pocket and carefully pulled out a photo, edges worn and colors faded with time. "The colonel asked us to give you this, and share a message on his behalf." The picture showed a group of Marines standing next to a rural schoolhouse, surrounded by smiling Afghan children holding books and notebooks. "This was taken during the colonel's second deployment, back in 2010, Brooks explained. Then, with quiet reverence, he recited the message. "A child remembers kindness. A unit never forgets." He met Sarah's eyes as he continued. "Colonel Blake has spent his career not only leading troops, but also helping rebuild communities, building schools, delivering aid. He believes it's the small, human moments that shape who we are more than any battlefield ever could." Sarah's father stepped forward, emotion catching in his throat. "She's always been that way," he said softly. "Seeing the people everyone else overlooks." Corporal Nash nodded respectfully. "Sir, Noah told us when everyone turned away, your daughter was the only one who looked at him, not like a threat, not like a problem, but like a person. Just a scared kid who needed help. He said he was about ready to give up, until she offered him half her sandwich." Sarah swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "It was just a sandwich." Sergeant Brooks offered a small smile. "Sometimes, that's all it takes," he replied. Noah hadn't eaten in almost a full day. He was frightened, desperate, and heading toward a dangerous decision. What you did gave him the push he needed to ask for help. Before they left, Brooks handed Sarah a small, sealed envelope. "Colonel Blake will be arriving in town tomorrow. He'd like to meet you in person, and he wanted you to have this. It may not seem like much, but it carries the gratitude of our entire unit." Later that evening, long after the Marines had left, Sarah sat quietly in her bedroom and opened the envelope. Inside, she found two things, a short handwritten note, and a Marine Corps Challenge coin, a rare and deeply meaningful token of honor, especially when presented to someone outside the military. The note was simple, yet profound. "Some heroes wear factory uniforms. Thank you for seeing my nephew when others chose not to." Sarah barely slept that night. Her thoughts spun in circles, the image of Noah's face, the weight of the coin in her palm, and the colonel's words echoing softly in her head. By morning, it still felt surreal. But when she saw the coin resting on her nightstand, cool and solid in the early light, she knew it had all truly happened. She got to work earlier than usual, hoping to slip in without drawing attention. What had been a private moment of compassion now felt like a storm stirring beneath the surface. She doubted Supervisor Harlan would care about Noah's story, or any story that didn't align with his rulebook. At 8:30 a.m., all heads turned as the factory's front doors opened with a dramatic clang. 3 Marines in full dress uniform, the same men who'd come to her home, walked with steady precision into the building. A fourth figure followed close behind, older, sharp-eyed, and unmistakably in charge. Colonel Kevin Blake. The receptionist behind the desk stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her coffee. "Can I help you, gentlemen? We're here to speak with factory management and with Supervisor Harlan," the colonel said, his voice steady and commanding. "It concerns an incident involving one of your employees." She quickly called for the general manager, who arrived moments later, clearly unsure of what was going on. After a brief round of introductions, the group was escorted upstairs to the second-floor conference room. Moments later, Harlan was paged over the intercom. Down on the factory floor, the news spread like fire through dry brush. Employees traded whispers and half-baked theories. Phones buzzed in pockets. Someone in shipping uploaded a blurry clip of the Marines entering the lobby with the caption, "Marines came over a sandwich. What did we miss?" Sarah tried her best to stay focused on her work, but it was impossible to ignore the stares. Her hands moved on autopilot as tools clicked and parts passed down the line. During the morning break, Monica made her way over and leaned in close. "Okay, what's going on?" she asked. "Do you know why there are Marines in the conference room with Harlan?" Sarah hesitated, glanced around, then gave a small nod. "Yeah. I think I do. Does this have something to do with that boy from yesterday?" Monica asked, her voice low and pressing. Before Sarah could answer, the factory intercom let out a crackle. "Sarah Collins to the conference room, please." The break room fell completely silent. Sarah stood up slowly, smoothed the front of her apron, and started her walk across the floor, every step watched by curious, widened eyes. When she stepped into the conference room, she was met with a scene she hadn't imagined. Supervisor Harlan sat stiffly in his chair, his face a shade redder than usual, his eyes locked onto the table in front of him. On either side of him sat the general manager and the HR director, both clearly uncomfortable, their postures tight with tension. Across from them stood the 4 Marines. Straight-backed. Calm. Composed. And at the center, unmistakably commanding the room, was Colonel Blake. "Miss Collins," the general manager said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please, have a seat." Sarah nodded and sat down, still unsure of what exactly was unfolding. Colonel Blake stepped forward. His uniform was flawless, polished to perfection, but what stood out more than the medals or ribbons was the quiet strength in his eyes. There was authority there, yes, but also warmth. "Miss Collins," he began, "I'm Colonel Kevin Blake. My nephew Noah is safe tonight because of the kindness you showed him yesterday." Sarah gave a small, respectful nod. "I've already shared the details with your management," the colonel went on. "But what concerns me most isn't just what happened to Noah, it's learning that you were punished for what should have been honored." The general manager cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Collins, we want to express our regret. We didn't understand the full situation at the time. If we had." With all due respect, Colonel Blake interrupted gently but firmly, what happened to Noah shouldn't have needed explaining. No child should have to be related to a military officer just to receive basic decency. Harlan shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "We have protocols, sir," he muttered. Colonel Blake didn't miss a beat. "And I understand the importance of protocols," he said evenly. "I've overseen security teams in active war zones. But this wasn't a breach of security, it was a moment when compassion was needed. And it was missed. The HR director quickly chimed in. We've already removed the warning from Miss Collins's file. We'll also be reviewing our policies on community interaction and employee discretion moving forward. Sarah sat there quietly, absorbing the weight of the moment. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't just being told what rules she'd broken. She was witnessing a shift, where the rules themselves were being re-evaluated because she had the courage to follow her conscience. By lunchtime, the story had spread across the factory floor like wildfire. Everyone had heard that the Marines were in the building. The video someone had taken in the shipping department, of the Marines walking in, had been posted online and shared dozens of times already. Then came the headline that took over the local news. Factory worker disciplined for feeding hungry child, Marines step in. The public reaction was immediate, and massive. The factory's social media pages lit up with comments. Most were outraged. Many were deeply moved. Parents, veterans, local leaders, they all weighed in, blasting the company's response and praising Sarah's quiet but powerful act. By early afternoon, things had escalated enough that the regional director called an emergency meeting with upper-level management. Inside the factory, the atmosphere had completely changed. Sarah, who had once blended into the background, now walked through the aisles receiving nods of recognition, quiet thank yous, even scattered applause from people who'd hardly spoken to her before. Even Monica, who'd warned her to stay out of it the day before, approached her with an apologetic smile. I should have done something too, she said. I didn't think it would make a difference. But clearly, it did. At 4:30 p.m., just as the shift ended, Sarah stepped into the front lobby, and there was Colonel Blake, waiting patiently with his hands folded in front of him. Hope you don't mind me sticking around, he said with a quiet smile. I wanted to talk to you without the boardroom walls. They walked across the street to a small park where a bench overlooked a leaf-scattered path. There, sitting quietly with his hands in his lap, was Noah, clean now, bundled in warm layers, but still carrying a guarded expression. As they approached, the boy looked up at her with a hesitant smile. Uncle Kevin said, "You're the sandwich lady," he said softly. Sarah smiled and knelt down beside the bench. I guess I am. Thank you, Noah whispered. Nobody else even looked at me. Colonel Blake placed a steady hand on his nephew's shoulder as Sarah's eyes welled ever so slightly. Noah's moving in with me and my family at Camp Lejeune, Colonel Blake said. We were able to fast-track the guardianship paperwork. He's going to be all right now. I'm really glad, Sarah replied with quiet sincerity. He deserves to be in a home where someone truly sees him. The colonel turned toward her, his voice dropping to a gentle, steady tone. You may think what you did was small, he said, but to Noah, and to all of us, it meant everything. He had just lost his mother. He was scared, alone, and completely invisible. That one sandwich reminded him that someone still noticed he was there. Sometimes, that's the thing that saves a life. At that exact moment, Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her father. Turn on Channel 5 News. You're on it. The story had caught the attention of the local news. They ran interviews with factory employees, replayed the footage of the Marines arriving, and praised Sarah's quiet but powerful stand. Without any security footage from the break area, the reporters pieced things together from eyewitnesses, framing Sarah as a kind-hearted factory worker who stood up against heartless corporate rules. By the next morning, Supervisor Harlan had been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review. Sarah received a formal apology directly from the company's president. Eagle Line Steel also announced a new initiative. Lunch with Honor, a joint effort with local food banks to identify and support children in need. Yes, it was a PR move. But it was also real. And it was going to help people. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood on stage in a packed auditorium during the town's annual Veterans Appreciation Ceremony. The mayor handed her a framed certificate with the words, Citizen of Quiet Honor. Behind him, Colonel Blake and several Marines stood proudly at attention. In the front row sat Noah, now dressed in his crisp young Marine's uniform. When Sarah's name was called, Noah didn't hesitate. He walked straight to her on the stage, wrapped his arms tightly around her waist, and whispered. "I ate your sandwich, and I felt like my mom was still watching over me." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she hugged him back. The entire room stayed silent for a few moments, no music, no speeches, just the sound of steady, respectful applause from a crowd that had once overlooked her, and now saw her for exactly who she was. As she stepped down from the stage, Sarah caught a glimpse of Supervisor Harlan standing alone at the back of the auditorium. Their eyes met briefly. He looked away first. Whether it was guilt, shame, or something softer, she couldn't say. But Sarah didn't feel victorious. She only felt hope. Maybe he'd learned something too. Later that evening, as guests started to leave, Colonel Blake approached her once more. "You know what's remarkable," he said. "Marines go through years of training to build the courage to run toward danger when everyone else runs away." He looked her squarely in the eye. "You showed that same courage just by listening to your heart. That's rare." Sarah gave a small smile. "It was just a sandwich." The colonel returned her smile, but shook his head. "It's never just a sandwich, Sarah. It's a sign. That even in our darkest moments, someone sees us. And sometimes, that's enough to help us find our way back." 6 months later, Sarah was still working at Eagle Line Steel, but the place felt entirely different. The Lunch with Honor program had grown. Each month, Sarah helped organize food drives, visited schools, and mentored new hires. What started as an awkward spotlight had turned into a meaningful role, one she never asked for, but carried with grace. Supervisor Harlan never came back. After a full review, he was transferred to a different facility in a non-supervisory role. His replacement, a former military veteran, brought a new kind of leadership. One built not just on rules, but on respect, understanding, and dignity. Sarah made a 2-hour drive every month to visit Noah at Camp Lejeune. He now called her Miss M, and during every visit, he eagerly shared updates from the young Marines, his ranks, his skills, his progress. The pain of losing his mother and being alone in the rain would always be part of him, but he was healing. Thanks to his uncle. Thanks to the Marines. Thanks to Sarah. At the factory entrance, the very lunchbox Sarah had used that rainy November day was placed in a glass display case. Beside it, a bronze plaque read, "Kindness needs no permission, only a heart." Her story became part of new employee orientation, not as a company rulebook footnote, but as a piece of the factory's identity. During a community outreach event one afternoon, a new worker finally asked what many had silently wondered. "Weren't you scared of losing your job that day?" Sarah paused for a second, then answered honestly. "I was more afraid of what it would mean, if I looked away." On the 1-year anniversary of the sandwich incident, Colonel Blake invited Sarah to be guest of honor at a Marine Corps Charitable Foundation dinner. Standing before a room filled with high-ranking officers, public officials, and military families, Sarah spoke briefly, but powerfully. "A sandwich can't fix the world, but sometimes, it's enough to restore someone's faith in it. Kindness doesn't need to be big or dramatic. It just needs to be timely, and without hesitation." She looked over at the Marines in their dress blues, then added, "Honor doesn't always come in uniform. Sometimes, it shows up in a factory apron with soup on its sleeves." One small act of kindness changed a day. It changed a child. It changed a company. And maybe, it changed the world. Now it's your turn. What's one act of kindness you received that you'll never forget? Subscribe to Uncovered Tales, where everyday courage still shines. Remember, hitting like isn't just for the video. It's for people who do the right thing, even when no one's watching. We told their story. You gave it meaning. Thank you.